Good morning, everybody. I'm Christine Buchanan, the Director of Employment Services and Training at Open Door Group, and I'm here to welcome you all to our one-hour webinar hosted by Marco Pasqua on energy, empathy, and diversity, becoming an inclusive employer. Open Door Group is excited to provide you with this webinar to celebrate September's Disability Employment Month, and all of you are in for a real treat. Marco has worked with employers of all sectors and sizes around accessibility and inclusion of persons with disabilities in the workplace. Advocating for universal design and inclusion is among his passions. This work has led him to consult with municipalities and business leaders on inclusive employment strategies for people with disabilities, including the province of BC's Employment Advisory Committee, the President's Group. Marco believes the success in business should not be purely based on the financial transactions. It is the human interactions that matter most. His speaking topics are focused on his personal stories overcoming obstacles and how to manage major life transitions with the framework he created called the CUBE principle. Creatively utilize your best energy. This morning, we have over 40 employers that have registered to join with us to hear what Marco has to say. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions, so please type them in. And now I'm going to pass it over to Marco. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to be talking about this subject because it's something that is very close to my heart. And obviously, as an individual with lived experience, having cerebral palsy, I really did learn a lot of things in navigating the workforce myself. So what we're going to go over today is some interesting stuff. I'm first going to share with you a little bit about my personal journey when it comes to employment and what that felt like for me and kind of the things that I went through. Then we're going to go through some practical tips and tools based on my learnings. And lastly, we're going to do some case studies actually as a group. So I am going to be testing you. I hope everyone has their Wheaties, their coffee, and they're ready to go. But essentially, based on the things that we discussed this morning, we're going to have some real world case studies of potential employees that could be starting at your company and some situations that they would find themselves in and how you might handle those situations based on their accessibility needs. Now, when I was growing up, I had a lot of dreams in terms of what I wanted to be when I grew up. Now, because I have cerebral palsy, I spent a lot of time in hospitals as a kid. I had over 13 surgeries from basically age 0 to 13. And as a result, it made me a more well-spoken person because I spent a lot of time in a hospital bed and the only people that were around me were doctors and adults. And so this gave me the natural ability to be a strong speaker. And as a result, I thought my dream job, of course, would be to be a surgeon because I saw all the great things that they were doing for me. But one day somebody dropped something really heavy and I kind of jumped a little bit. And in that moment, I realized maybe being a surgeon's not the best thing for me because having cerebral palsy and being spastic, you don't necessarily want me doing your surgeries, right? But anyways, the point being is I realized that you can be a hero, you can make a change, you can be a change maker in the community, and you can do that by being more than just a doctor. And so the pathway of accessibility and consulting kind of opened up for me in being a speaker, but I never thought that I would get there based on the beginnings of my career. Now, when it comes to being accessible, I'll just see if we can click here. There we go. All right, so when it comes to being an accessible and inclusive workplace, I've learned that there are 3 main categories that you have to focus on in order to do this. First, you have to change attitudes. Then you can overcome physical barriers or any other kinds of barriers. And then lastly, that's when you transform leadership and culture. So let's dive a little bit deeper into changing attitudes first. Now, attitudinal barriers are among the first that you'll face in any workplace. It's that perception, trying to have unconscious biases around what somebody is really capable of. And that's something that I really faced, especially in the beginnings of my career. Now, I think about it, and it really comes down to how people perceive disability or even how they define disability. Now, when most people think of disability, they may think of something like this, a wheelchair, something like this, a hearing aid or other device, or even this, a white cane for individuals with low vision or who are visually impaired. Now, What about the hidden disabilities? Things like anxiety and depression, ADHD, autism, learning disabilities. These are things that you're not going to see necessarily on the surface. There isn't any dead giveaways, but people could be struggling with them in your workplace or in your friends or family, and you might not even know. I think that a lot of reasons why people don't disclose this when it comes to employment is because they honestly think that if they let people know that they're struggling with these conditions, that it may negatively impact them, or there's a stigma involved in terms of how they can actually complete their duties or do their work. And I think that there's been a lot of changes in recent history around how people perceive individuals with disabilities, especially hidden ones. But at the beginnings of my career, I had to deal with some perceptions as well. It was actually my very first job opportunity. I was so thrilled. It was in high school during a co-op. And I always loved computers because of technology advancing people's abilities. And I've always been well spoken, as I mentioned, so sales and computers made sense for me. So when I learned I was going to be at this computer store, I was so pumped. And I did the best I could do. They had me out on the sales floor. I was chatting up people. Things were going so great, in fact, that by the end of my co-op, I asked the manager at the store if I could be considered for a full-time position. I'll never forget the look on his face. He kind of paused and had a little bit of disconcern on his face and said to me, actually, Marco, could I maybe take you out for lunch? I've never been a guy to say no to a free lunch. So of course I said, sure. And he took me out to lunch and explained that he thinks I'm doing a really great job and I'm an excellent salesperson, but his major concern around me being a full-time employee is as a full-time employee comes with the full-time duties, meaning I would have to restock shelves, potentially lift heavy boxes. And he was really concerned that if one of those boxes were to fall on me, I might hurt myself, and he just couldn't live with that. Well, not taking no for an answer, I thought maybe I could suggest a compromise. So I said to him, I'll tell you what, if you give me 1 week to prove myself and that I have the abilities and capabilities to do what you expect in the role, and I'm not able to do it, then no harm, no foul. You can tell me that it didn't work out and I'll be on my way. But if you give me that chance to prove what I'm capable of, I think you just might be surprised. Well, he liked that compromise, and so he agreed. And the very next day, I started at this computer store as a full-time employee. But of course, as the universe has it, I was faced immediately with my first challenge when a customer walked in the door asking for a video card. You see, video cards happen to be at the very top shelf, okay? And well, I definitely wasn't going to be able to reach that video card. But I thought to myself, looked at my environment, I'm an innovative guy, I can make this work. So when the customer walked up to me, I sort of sized him up. He was about 6 foot something. And I kind of looked at him, I looked at the video card, I looked at him, and I gestured as though to reach up and grab the card, knowing full well I wasn't going to be able to reach the card. But because I looked at him and I looked at the card, without even thinking, subconsciously, he reached up, grabbed the card, and said, yeah, this one here, and passed it to me. And now I had the card in my hand and was able to sell him the product. Well, the coolest thing about this story is that the entire time this was taking place, that manager happened to be watching the entire interaction going on, and his jaw just hit the floor. I realized in that moment, not only had I shattered his own attitudinal barriers around who I was and what I was capable of, but I really shattered my own expectations of myself and what it means to be a self-advocate and advocate for yourself in the workplace. This would spark an interest in technology that would carry me through for the rest of my life. So much so that I actually went on pursuit in a degree in video game design and got a degree and was fortunate enough to land a job at one of the biggest game studios in the world. And that was Electronic Arts. Now you can see my friend Mr. Zoolander here. He's saying, now that you got a job, can you get inside the building? Many employers face the challenges of not having accessible doors or perhaps not even having rampways to get up if I'm a wheelchair user. But this wasn't actually the case for Electronic Arts. The challenge for me at Electronic Arts actually came from the bus route itself and actually getting to the location. I was so excited that I landed a job at one of the biggest game studios in the world that I pre-planned my entire route via transit. So I knew exactly what stop I had to get off on my very first day. And I remember the day very clearly. I'm on the bus, I'm seeing my fellow colleagues that I knew had started with me that were getting off at this bus stop, and I was getting ready to go and unbuckling myself. I pulled the lever, letting the driver know I was getting off, and I was unbuckling myself, and I wheeled to the front, and my colleagues are getting off. And just before I go to get off, I'm thinking he's going to lower the ramp. He doesn't. In fact, he just starts shutting the door and begins to drive off. I started to stop him and say, "Excuse me, driver, I'm actually getting off here. I'm with these guys. I'm starting my new job." And he said, "Well, I can't let you off here." I said, "Well, what do you mean you can't let me off here?" He says, "Well, you see that little bus stop sign there?" I said, "Sure, yeah, I see that." He says, "Well, you see how it doesn't have an accessible symbol on it?" He used the word handicap. I hate that word, so I'm not going to use it. He says, "You see how it's missing the accessible decal there?" I said, "Sure." He says, "That means that the city has deemed that this stop is actually not accessible, meaning that I can't let you off at this stop or anyone else with any accessibility needs." I'd never heard of this before in my life, and it really blew my mind. And unfortunately, the next stop that was accessible and I was able to get off was 6 blocks later. Now, I don't know if any of you are local and know Burnaby very well, but that's where the EA head office is. And it's at the top of Sanderson Way, which is this massive winding hill. So that wasn't going to be an issue for me to wheel up that hill. But now I had to combat with the fact of going 6 blocks back and wheeling up the hill. And if you live in Vancouver or you're dealing with the snow, that's not the greatest thing ever. But I accepted this as my fate. The driver told me it wasn't possible. And so I thought it wasn't possible. So weeks went by and I continued to do this, getting off six blocks later, doing it. I was very exhausted. It's not the greatest thing if you have to go to a meeting and you're covered and drenched in rain and everyone else looks dry. And well, it was really taking a hit on my confidence until one day I had a driver by the name of Chris, and that changed my life forever. You see, Chris had noticed that I was getting off at a stop 6 blocks later, and he knew that I was an employee at EA, and one day he just decided to ask me, "Marco, I don't understand. What's that?" "Well, I'm seeing that your colleagues are getting off at one stop, but you're waiting till 6 blocks later and getting off at the other stop. Why is that?" And I kind of puffed my chest out thinking I was so smart and I knew the answer. And I said, "Well, you see how that accessible sign is missing on the bus stop?" And I explained the whole thing to him. And he says, "Well, that's stupid." I said, "Well, I agree with you, but I don't know what to do about it." And he says, "Well, if there is something we can do about it, I'm sure of it." I said, "Really?" He said, "Of course. Leave it to me." And so that day he went to his manager, who went to the city planner, who then talked to the technician. And within a matter of weeks, they actually had permanently changed that stop to be an accessible stop, because when that stop was initially created, the slope was different. And it may have been dangerous at that point, but clearly at this point, there was more than enough space for somebody in a wheelchair to get off. And I was so pumped and thrilled that I had one individual, one bus driver, who said that I am not going to accept this. I'm not going to say that this is okay. And because of his one actions, that bus stop, even today, is still permanently changed to an accessible stop. And that was such a thrill for me, because I knew that even if I was no longer working at that organization anymore, that stop was changed for not only individuals with chairs, but who may have other walking devices, mothers with strollers, or dads with strollers. Hashtag dad love too, right? But the point is that it's changed for everybody. And that was really, really fantastic. Well, it's a good thing it did get changed, because unfortunately in 2010, I lost my job when the recession hit. And that was a big blow to my ego yet again, because I thought to myself, game design was the only thing I went to school for. And I'm a person with a disability. Well, I mean, what am I going to do? I'm kind of scared. I mean, I can't go out and get a construction job and just put on a hard hat and say I'm ready to work. I can't even go flip burgers at a fast food joint because it's too dangerous with my wheelchair and the grease. I'll never forget the phone call I had with my girlfriend at the time, my now wife. And I called her and let her know that, unfortunately, honey, I lost my job. And it was a really, really tough conversation. In fact, I tried to get back into the game industry because, I thought, well, maybe I can succeed at another organization. And I remember these interviews; they were really great. I thought I nailed them. I would go to these interviews with these game companies, thought I did a really great job, get the phone call from the HR manager, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, they're going to tell me I got the job. And the strangest thing happened. They said, "Unfortunately, we went with somebody else." So I said, "Okay, can you give me some constructive feedback on what I could do to improve myself in the future. And the person kind of awkwardly paused for a moment on the phone and said, I don't really know how to tell you this, but you have too much energy, and we don't really know how we could handle that. I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for the feedback. I will work on that, I guess. Okay, great. So then I interview at another game studio, completely different part of town, completely different HR manager. Again, goes really well. Next thing you know, I get the phone call, and same thing. We've gone with somebody else. I ask them the same question, and they literally tell me the exact same answer. You have too much energy. We don't know what to do with that. And I thought to myself, I was devastated. Now, going back to the phone call with my wife at the time, I said to her, this is not really working out so well. What am I going to do? And she goes, well, of course, you're going to do what you were always meant to do. And I'm thrilled about this. I said, why are you thrilled? That I lost my job. I'm having difficulty getting back in the industry. She said, because when you were working in the game industry, some days you were working 15 to 18-hour shifts. And days where I would just drive you into work was an excuse for me to spend more time with you. I don't think that this is the industry for you, and I also don't think that this is your calling. I think that you're truly meant to do what it is you're supposed to do, and that's inspire other people. Well, I thought that was really great, but I'm like, I'm only one guy. What can I really do out there in the community to inspire people? But then I thought to myself, there's been a lot of people who are just one guy. I thought about guys like Rick Hansen, who started out on a mission on his own to raise awareness about spinal cord injury research. And 30 plus years later today, he's raised over hundreds of millions of dollars for spinal cord injury research and has an amazing team of individuals. And I bet you didn't know this. It's because of guys like Rick Hansen that we have so many curb cuts in the city. The Rick Hansen Foundation actually originally was established on the UBC campuses, and it's because of Rick's voice and constantly letting people know that curb cuts should exist, that we're so spoiled here in the lower mainland and why we have so many here. So that was just one guy. And then I thought to myself, well, there's been another guy, Terry Fox, here locally. Again, he started on a mission to raise awareness about cancer, and now 30 plus years later for him, he has kids and families still running in his honor. And so I thought to myself, wait a minute, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can start a business. Maybe I can figure it out. And so I really determined that losing my job was actually the best thing ever. Not only was I able to lean on those skill sets I learned being in those long hours in the hospital of talking to people and being articulate, but I was really starting to hone in on what it means to be an advocate, but an advocate with a true mission. And you can see in some of these photos here, that is actually the man in motion himself, Mr. Rick Hansen. As a result of the work that I ended up doing, I ended up working very closely with Rick. He became somebody that I consider very much a mentor of mine. And he was the one who actually encouraged me to use accessibility as a topic. I'll be honest with you guys, I avoided accessibility like the plague when I started out as a speaker, because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as somebody with a disability talking about accessibility. I wanted to be seen for my merits and what I could bring to the table. But Rick was really the one to encourage me to say, no, Marco, you can really use this as a platform for positive change. And that's what started me down this pathway of really wanting to understand accessibility holistically, not just from a physical aspect, but how it affects everyone, our communities, our attitudes, and otherwise. And that was a really fantastic thing to happen for me. So going into transforming leadership and culture, I started to realize that as I was out there doing these things, that there were actually business leaders, city officials, other municipalities that are really focused on creating accessible places. And many communities, especially today across BC, are making positive strides in creating inclusive cultures, including the city of Surrey, where I'm from. In fact, the city of Surrey had learned about the work I was doing with Rick and talking and all these things, and actually asked me if I would be open to coming and consulting with the city 2 days a week on hiring policies, as well as other policies within the city that have now been implemented citywide, which is the biggest honor as a civilian to be asked to come in and really support your city in becoming stronger. But I'm sure many of you out there are wondering, okay, well, are there other businesses out there or leaders that are already starting this? Are there tools, resources that I can actually access to get started on my inclusion journey? I'm happy to say absolutely 100% there is. There's a group called the President's Group, or Accessible Employers. Now, the coolest thing is, as a result of starting my business, I never would have had access to this group. But it's actually as a result of being a speaker, people catching wind of that and learning of the opportunity of them looking for consultants for this group of people, that I actually learned about the President's Group, and I actually became hired as only one of 2 consultants to work with all the companies involved. So the President's Group is comprised of 23 change-driven BC business leaders that are focused on creating more inclusive and accessible workspaces. These are some of the groups that are currently involved, and in fact, there's some new groups I heard just yesterday that are going to be joining this advisory committee. Everything from the Vancouver Airport, the CEO up at the Vancouver Airport, all the way down to a small business like Gabby and Jules here in Port Moody, which is a pie shop. And the cool thing about this pie shop, not only do they have the most delicious pies, I'm not trying to plug them, they're not paying me here, but that was actually started as a business by the founder because her daughter, Gabriella, is on the autism spectrum. And she wanted to create a space where her daughter could feel like she could move into upper management someday, that she could feel like she could have meaningful employment. And today, get this, this is not a slip of the tongue, over 50% of their staff are on the autism spectrum, because they've learned that most of these individuals that they work with are very good at attention to detail and churning out pies as fast as you can imagine, and they are fantastic. So it's been really great. Now, for you stats nerds out there, don't worry, I'm not leaving you out. I do have some information for you. And that's a graphic that we worked on when I was with the President's Group. So here in the province of BC, by 2025, they estimate that we're going to have about 1 million job openings. But there's good news. There's a huge opportunity here. You see, people with disabilities represent 614,630 people. That's working age, 15 to 64, and that's inclusive of individuals with cognitive disabilities, mental disabilities, as well as seniors. Okay, so that's a big market of people who are hungry and ready to work. Now, I don't want to insult any of your intelligence by reading this entire graphic. I trust that you can read it as we're talking here. But just to highlight a few points that I always find so interesting: improve productivity by hiring a more diverse workforce. You're 2 times more likely to exceed your financial targets. That's absolutely been found to be true within our President's Group member organizations. You're more likely to be an innovator and innovative and anticipate change. You heard about the reaching story when I was at the computer store. Well, it's because I've looked at challenges and things differently my entire life. And I'm not the only one. There's employees with disabilities out there who've had to face things differently their entire life. And that type of ingenuity and change is good for any business. But here's the one that I love the most, that really breaks down stigmas: the expanded consumer reach. The spending power of people with disabilities is close to $55 billion here in Canada. Why is that important? Well, because many people assume that because people have a disability, they don't have the funds in order to contribute to a business, to buy your products, to buy your services, and that's simply not true. And that $55 billion doesn't even include their friends and family. So we're talking about big businesses who want to shop at places that reflect where they see themselves in the community. So this is a really big thing, a huge reflection for many of you employers out there. Now, one of the companies that's really behind this movement is actually SAP Labs Canada. They're a massive software company, over 100,000 employees worldwide. But here in BC, the managing director, Kirsten Sutton, she happens to be one of the co-chairs of the entire President's Group. She's doing fantastic work. And she speaks to a diversity and inclusion strategy, which is great. But where I was hosted, when I was initially hosted, I was hosted by Tamara Vrooman of Van City. Now, Van City is still a part of the President's Group. Tamara used to be the co-chair. But the coolest thing was, when I started as a consultant, they didn't just want me to be working from home and kind of commuting in, sort of happenstance. They wanted me to experience what it was actually like to be in the business and working out of their offices. So they onboarded me just like they would onboard any other employee. Now, the cool thing is, I want to reflect on this, is that I remember when I was applying to be this consultant, it was a very new position, so even the job description was quite vague. And I remember kind of being taken aback because one of the questions in their questionnaire was, do you identify with having a disability? Now, any of you people out there with disabilities, feel like that's a red flag. Like, are they trying to flag me out? Or are they trying to make sure that I don't get an opportunity? Well, I later learned from Van City that it was actually because of that question that I was actually being white gloved into the situation, meaning that I was actually going to be fast tracked to ensure that I at least had a face-to-face interview. Now, I want to be clear. This is not affirmative action. This is not to say that now people with disabilities have more opportunity than those who don't identify. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to level the playing field a little bit so that if I have just as much skill sets as candidate B, that I at least have an opportunity to explain myself or ask for accommodations in advance of my interview to ensure that I have a fair opportunity. Tamara is a big change maker. She's a fantastic woman. And rather than speak on her behalf, we do actually have a video about building a diverse and inclusive culture that I'm going to share with you now that explains how Tamara approaches diversity in Van City. We'll just pop over to that right now.
The word accessibility is really about diversity and inclusion. So how welcoming are our workplaces to people with diverse abilities and diverse backgrounds? And once we welcome them to our organization, do we really include them? It's often said that diversity is inviting somebody to a party, but inclusion is actually asking them to dance. Having a diverse workforce, one that has different experiences, one that can appeal to different parts of the market, and in a way that creates a good, healthy morale for the employees that you already have, it is a competitive advantage. It gives business the opportunity to see things differently.
If you're an employer who wants to take what you think is a leap of faith and start more inclusive hiring practices, employing people with diverse abilities, please know it's actually not a leap of faith. Don't feel like you have to do this all by yourself. Don't feel like you have to be the subject matter expert now in employing with people with diverse abilities. You're already the subject matter expert in your business. So find a great partner and work with them.
I was originally with this job hiring company who recommended me Van City. I never really worked in an office environment before, let alone a credit union, but I did well in my interview and I connected instantly with my coworkers, so I was hired. I have autism, which is developmental disability. In some ways, I may act a little strange, but in actuality, I am pretty much on the ball. Van City is willing to help people in need, not just the community, but also their staff as well.
When I looked at their website when I was first applying, I noticed that they placed a high importance on diversity and inclusion. So that was what really attracted me to the organization. By hiring people with diverse abilities, you increase their participation in community life and you increase their overall acceptance by society members and in society in general. It's definitely increased my confidence because I have to deal with the public more and more. I'm definitely more willing to take risks, and if somebody says something's not possible, I will definitely go try it anyway.
It's very important that we reflect the communities in which we live and serve. It just makes sense for us. But it's also really important to me because I'm a person with a diverse ability. I've experienced depression and anxiety for probably 20 years. And so, to work for an organization that I know truly does believe in this work, they truly walk the talk, is pretty special.
So often we think that hiring people with disabilities is the right thing to do from a society and a community point of view, and that's absolutely true. The things that we have learned and the experiences that we have had by welcoming a more diverse workforce into our organization are almost too many to mention. We're demonstrating that it's the right thing to do from a business point of view as well. It's really one of those classic win-wins.
Okay, so now you're probably thinking, well, are there some resources that I can utilize to get started? Well, as you already saw earlier today, we kind of shared the business case. These are some I would recommend. Accessible recruitment checklist. These are things like being able to understand things like pre-interview. So are you able to provide instructions on how to get to the location ahead of time? Oh, okay. No problem. That's all right. This is technology, everyone. That's okay. That's not a barrier we will be affected by. Awesome. So accessible recruitment, for example. So things like, can you provide the directions to the location ahead of time in advance of the interview? Perhaps if somebody expresses a need of needing accommodations, do you have an accessibility email address you can send them to ask for accommodations? Do you have a diversity and inclusion statement on your website to make it clear that you want to actually have this in place and that people can come to your organization? So that's just some examples of what's on this checklist. FAQs and misconceptions around people with disabilities, much like that spending power aspect, there's a lot of misconceptions around people with disabilities. We're going to help to really curb that and, address that. And of course, disability related language and tips. So as opposed to an anecdotal, like, don't ask this or say this term and do that, it's more like situationally, these are the things we would suggest, or the language around talking to somebody. And most importantly, it's literally just ask the person. If you feel uncomfortable or not really sure the terminology to use or how you want to address or even bring up someone's disability, literally you can just ask the person, and more often than not, that person will be happy to open up about some of these aspects. So many of these resources are available on accessibleemployers.ca. It's a fantastic website. And the coolest thing about the website is that all of the resources are available for employers for free forever, because the province of BC has this goal that by 2024, we want to be the most accessible province in all of Canada, but we can't do that alone. And the President's Group realized that. And so outside of their 23 organizations, we actually last October launched the Community of Accessible Employers. And that gives you an opportunity to join as a member on the website and to get these resources, but also you answer a questionnaire that as you answer the questions, it actually suggests resources for you based on where you think you're at in your inclusion journey. So it's actually tailor-made. It's like having like a resource butler there for you to be able to present these things for you and say, well, you might want to consider these resources first. The coolest thing as well is that it is a community. So as there's more community events with the President's Group, and as they're doing more things in the community, you'll be in the loop of it, you'll be on the mailing list, and you'll be able to really learn from other business leaders that are getting the job done and the benefits that they've found. So I would highly suggest, if you haven't already joined the community, go on there. And I want to make it clear, I'm no longer an in-house consultant with the President's Group. I'm literally just speaking about this because I'm so passionate about it. The two people who've taken over for myself are fantastic individuals. Absolutely, you can learn more about them on the Accessible Employers website or emailing them at info@accessibleemployers.ca. And they're the in-house consultants that are working directly with the President's Group. But it's a fantastic resource. It's a great place to get started. And again, I would highly recommend it. So let's see here. All right, there you go. And so why is this important? Well, as we've discussed throughout this webinar, people with disabilities have different strengths and perspectives that perhaps your typical applicant doesn't. And it's because of this that they're able to look at things a little differently, okay? It changes the focus on the ability. So rather than focusing on somebody's disability and what you can actually see or maybe not see, focusing on what they actually bring to the table, what they're able to help your company to grow with. And it encourages an open dialogue. Now, I'm not sure if any of you out there have an invisible disability or a disability that you haven't disclosed to your staff if you're a team leader, but I would highly recommend, if you feel comfortable with it, show a little bit of vulnerability and show the fact that maybe if you're the one as a leader to start this conversation, it may actually help other people to start the conversation with you as well. So that's definitely something to consider, okay? There we go. Now, at the end, I always like to put this about making authentic connections, because I think that this is truly important. For you business leaders out there, get to know your team members. Get to know why they started to join your company, why they want to contribute, what it is that they feel they can truly bring to the table. I think that by making these strong connections, you're not only going to learn more about your team, but you're going to learn more about yourself in the process. Support them to reach their goals. Regardless of if they have a disability or not, these are just great tips for anybody to know that making these authentic connections is really what's going to support you in building a stronger culture within the community that is your organization. So what can you actually do about it? Well, what I've learned through my time at the President's Group and consulting in general is if you're a team leader, you got to set the tone from the top. I want to make it clear that those advisors in the President's Group are not HR professionals. These are the literal CEOs and actual owners and founders of these businesses. So they're setting the tone from the top. They're the one that's determining that this is so important to their organization. And so you're going to need to be able to do that yourself. Again, to recap, allow yourself to be vulnerable with your staff. As I said, if you feel comfortable with it, and you don't have to, but open up, create a dialogue. Our representative from UBC, Santa Ono, he's the president of UBC, he writes a blog, and a while back he wrote a blog about how he himself has invisible disability, and that, you know, this is not something that he would normally disclose, but when he wrote this blog post about his invisible disability, it showed that authenticity. It showed that he was willing to put himself out there and really show his staff that this is important to him. Provide workplace accommodations. There's a misconception out there that workplace accommodations have to cost a lot of money. That's simply not true. There's a lot of different things you can do that are usually around under $500 is the most for most accommodations. Now, I'm not talking about building ramps or accessible doorways, but things like task lighting, adjusting the size or height of a desk, having flexible work hours for somebody, allowing them to work remotely. Now, I know that this doesn't always work in all situations, but if your workplace allows it, see what you can do to have some wiggle room with this, because you may be noticing that someone feels really stressed out in the mornings and perhaps they've been late for meetings. Well, maybe all it's going to take is an adjustment, because this is something that they haven't felt comfortable or safe to disclose, that they have a condition that you didn't know about. And if you're a team member, well, being a peer mentor, that's just good in general, okay? But be open and welcoming. I mean, I think that goes without saying, but a lot of places, you'd be surprised, okay? Check your environment for potential barriers. This one really gets me, okay? Because, for example, I go into a restaurant establishment. Many times I've gone into a restaurant establishment, and I'm going in to use the accessible bathroom, and I go to open the door, and it's kind of jammed. I look in and there's boxes and storage that's being used there. And when I bring it up to staff, they say, oh, I'm so sorry, we're just temporarily using it. Well, I'm temporarily a client of yours or a customer, and I'm about to leave. So that's the thing, is like, don't think that you have to use these spaces as your extra spaces. These are there for a reason. Prove and show that you're an accessible, inclusive space for everyone to enjoy. And ask how you can best support. And again, you're not in this alone. There are fantastic organizations out there that can help you, line you up with candidates and have events that can really support you, such as the Open Door Group. Okay, you have the BC Win Project. Neil Squire Society provides workplace accommodation tips and tools. So there are many organizations out there that can support you along the way in your journey. All right, so you're not alone in this, for sure. Now, just checking the time here, we do have about 20 minutes, which is great. And I'm going to suggest that we go and we at least do our first case study here, and we'll see how well we do. I want to leave enough time for questions at the very end. So bear with me, everyone. This is now where you're interacting. All right, so case study number 1. You're the manager at a new tech startup. Adam's dog Quincy just finished his service animal training and now will be joining him on the daily in the workplace. While on duty and wearing his vest, Quincy is not to be pet by other employees. But even after several requests, they continue to pet him and tell Adam it's no big deal. So if you were this manager, how would you support Adam in making sure everyone respects Quincy's role? I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes to kind of mull that over and start writing in your answers, and then they'll let me know what your answers are, and we can talk about that as a group. Okay, I suppose we can start to take some answers as they're coming in. Has anyone responded at all yet?
No, it's not.
Okay, we'll give you some time.
We got from Sean, check in with Adam about how he would best like you to handle it.
Yes, yeah, I know, absolutely. That's a really good suggestion. I mean, oftentimes, and even I've learned this with friends of mine who are blind or have low vision, what people don't realize is, yes, Quincy is a dog, but when he's got that vest on, he's on duty. And so when you're petting that dog, you're actually breaking them out of their habits and out of weeks and weeks of training. So although you may not think it's a big deal, you're actually kind of affecting the working relationship of Adam and Quincy. And that's definitely not something that you want to do. And so I'm sure that Adam would, come to management, but you as managers out there, you can actually come to Adam and maybe even request that you have a meeting and say that you notice he's been a little stressed out about what's going on and the best ways to handle it. So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. So we got another one.
Sure.
Was have a team meeting and explain Quincy's role. Remind the protocol about guide dogs and ask staff how they can best support.
Absolutely. That's 100% great. I mean, that's really the ideal scenario, as I just mentioned. I think that, to understand that essentially you might have Adam as your employee, but Quincy's an employee too. I think Craig Richmond, the CEO of the Vancouver Airport, has said himself, one of their employees had a service animal named Horatio, and he said that he was one of the most favored employees there. So he was definitely referring to him as an employee, and he took that very seriously, okay? So that's fantastic. We'll move on to the next case study, and yeah, thanks so much, everybody. All right, case study number 2. So Chris, a new member of your team, asks what types of adaptive software that you would have to support someone with vision loss. This is not something that you've been asked before, but you know that there's a budget to accommodate his needs. So what are the first steps you might take to support Chris? All right, so again, we'll take a few minutes, but again, if you have any burning answers that you just want to get out there, we can just start to rattle them off and everyone else will have time to think about it. That way you're not looking at my sort of blank face. I'm staring here, right?
From our IT support at ODG, they said, ask IT to research what is available.
That's a very good suggestion because as we know, many companies have restrictions as to, initially at least, what the software that's available. However, if it is an accessibility need, perhaps Chris could open up about the software that he's utilized in the past and why it would be as a use for him as an individual in order to do his duties. Some things like magnification softwares, some of them are actually free and don't actually cost a lot of money. Some are a little bit more advanced, but yes, ask IT for sure, but also make sure you ask Chris of his needs.
Someone did say first steps is to first ask him what software.
100%. As I was saying, I was kind of hinting that earlier about ask the person, right? So ask the person what software they've utilized before, because honestly, by getting that software, you're actually now enabling Chris to be at the same level as the other employees. And in fact, he might be so used to that software that he's able to zip through this and that way quicker than some other employees. So really having the right tools will be vital for that individual to do their job. So that's great. Any other input or no?
Someone did say contact CNIB and ask for a consultation.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, CNIB is really, really good, especially in cases like this for somebody like Chris, who has an idea of some of the software, but maybe CNIB, the Institute for the Blind, the National Institute for the Blind, Canadian National Institute for the Blind, maybe they have other suggestions, or maybe there's even new software that Chris is not even aware of. And I know that CNIB often does, and you don't quote me on this, but they actually will come in for no cost to have a conversation with managers. But I think that if there's extensive training that,
Marilyn told me, said yes, they do have that.
There you go. So there's no financial barrier. So no excuses to anyone out there if you land in this specific situation. Okay. So one more case study. You guys are doing fantastic. All right. Case study number 3. Stacy is the most recent of your new hires, and she happens to be a wheelchair user. You want to ensure that she feels welcome and a part of the team. How do you make her feel welcome, and what do you need to think about in the long term? All right. So just another minute or so, and you can start to pipe those in as well. Any feedback? No?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. That's okay.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there you go. As soon as I say that, yeah, I should just talk more, yeah.
So from Kamlibs, think about her day-to-day needs coming into work and what facilities she would need, such as a desk. Do a walkthrough before she starts.
Yes, excellent, excellent. And some things that are people who don't necessarily need to utilize it, like accessible door buttons and things like this, you may not even consider that. Something else that you can also do is a general walkthrough as a manager. That's great, but you can also access accessibility professionals through the Rick Hansen Foundation, who will actually can do a full audit and assessment of your workspace. And I will say that there is a cost to that. But the results that you can get about being a certified organization with the Rick Hansen brand is a huge, huge benefit to any organization. So if you haven't learned about that, you can actually visit rickhansen.com and learn about getting an accessibility certification and assessment. And that's another way that you can do that as well. I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone else if there's other responses in there, but is there anything else?
Yes, someone else said ensure that she's included in events and meetings, etc., where accessibility may be an issue.
Yes. Now, I will say there is a caveat to that, okay? We can't make assumptions that Stacy is going to want to be the accessibility champion within her organization. I actually did this talk yesterday at a tech conference, and an individual brought up the fact of how do we address the fact if somebody like Stacy doesn't want to be this champion? And I simply said, there's a couple ways you can go about this, okay? One, I think it's great that organizations do have accessibility champions, so that's a huge win. Maybe if Stacy is not willing to be front facing, that she could actually give you feedback privately that you can incorporate as an organization that won't be shared to anyone. But if Stacy is open to it and you're willing to start a subcommittee within your organization, I think it's a fantastic idea to have an accessibility or D&I group that can talk about the concerns as an organization and can have that lived experience to back it up. Because at the end of the day, as I said, these lived experiences are a true asset, and you're missing out if you're not utilizing that depending on the person's comfortability level. Is there another? I saw a flash, so.
Yeah.
I think that one from Elizabeth. She said, one thing I'd want to do is talk to Stacy about what she sees as issues / opportunities that matter to her.
Yes. Yes. Again, it's like you would want to do this for any employee. Make sure everyone feels included. That is what a truly inclusive culture is all about. But again, talking to Stacy one-on-one, addressing her obviously as an individual, doing all the things that you feel is necessary, and making sure you don't have boxes or things blocking the hallway so that she can access all the main vital areas, whether that's a printer, whether that's a bathroom. Just do that assessment, that walkthrough that the other individual mentioned. That's extremely vital. And as I said, you can get support from other organizations that can look at your spaces and really help to work with that employee to make sure that they're going to excel in the way that you hope that they will. Okay, so that basically ends the formal portion of our webinar here, and we have about 5 to 7 minutes based on my watch for any additional questions, and you can put me in the hot seat here. So first and foremost, thank you so much. I've been Marco Pasqua. I am a consultant today, as well as continuing to be a speaker. I love my job. I love what I do. I've been doing it for the past 9 years or so now, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So thanks so much, everybody.
Okay, from Jennifer. How do we get a hold of you if we want to inquire about having you speak at a group meeting in our organization?
Okay, well, I'm pretty easy to find. It's literally my first and last name.com. So marcopasqua.com. That's how you can find me, which is very quick and easy. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you very much.
We have another question from Elizabeth. She asks, how would you recommend approaching leadership in an organization to get this on the agenda?
Yes, this is where those resources come in handy. That business case resource that I showed you, you can actually download and print all of the resources I mentioned on the website, and there's hundreds of them on the website. You can download them and you can print them as a PDF, and you can actually bring that in and show them that infographic and say that you had this conversation or that you were in this webinar and that you think that there are some real vital resources here. But I encourage you to also do your own research on the website. Look at the different categories that are there: leadership and culture, the built environment, all these things. Find the ones that you think would pique their interest the most based on your type of business, and kind of use that as a starting point or a starting point conversation. Also, you can let them know that recently, within the last month to month and a half, we actually passed the Accessible Canada Act here in Canada, which is like the equivalent of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but for Canadians. it's initially going to affect federal businesses, ensuring that there's legislation around making sure that people with disabilities are included. However, the province of BC is going to mirror that of our federal legislation. And so eventually all businesses are going to want to ensure that they're accessible and inclusive. So if you go to the business case of saying, listen, it's in our best interest to get ahead of the curve on this and actually get some of these answers and these things in place, then we're going to actually have opportunities for funding, grants, and other aspects to ensure that we have the best employees on our team. So I found that that normally really piques people's interest of going, oh, okay, this is not only a great thing to do, but eventually it's going to be expected. And I think that that's great. As I always say, people with disabilities have been around as long as people have been around. So this is a fantastic thing.
Okay, from Anika. Right now, organizations are in need of talent and hence are going full board with D&I initiatives. What would you recommend when talent supplies more and employers may not necessarily look at diverse talent?
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is that people say that there isn't enough candidates, but there are candidates out there. It's just finding the right fit. So I think like to get employers on board, I think it's about finding the right employees for the right roles. Okay, I want to be clear. As a person with a disability, I have to tell you, just because I have a disability doesn't mean I feel I'm entitled to have any job under the sun. I still have to have the ability to get the job done. So I really think that by being able to show certain employers that you have employees in your docket or you have individuals that you're considering that actually have the skill sets necessary, or that there are transferable skills based on someone's lived experience that they can bring to the table if they're just given that opportunity. Volunteerism is huge. So helping your candidates get a volunteer experience that may lend itself to a greater job will help to align those candidates to fall in place of those jobs. And then you'll get that great balance of you've got all these candidates and now you've got all these opportunities and now they're mirroring each other. But again, organizations like Open Door Group are great because you often host events in the community to talk about this and provide additional help and support, as well as in some cases supporting some candidates and lining them up as well. So, you know, it's about partnerships, it's about community. Find those other organizations. It's a great resource on the Accessible Employers website called basically Working with Disability Service Organizations, okay? Disability Employment Service Organizations. And it gives you tips on how to line yourself up with those service orgs so that they have the expertise to support you in getting those individuals that are hired onto your team. I hope that was sort of a convoluted answer, but I hope that that answers the question.
Awesome. I don't think we have any more questions, so I'm going to hand it over back to Christine now.
Well, thank
Okay.
you, Marco. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh,
It was a great thrill to hear everything that you talked about. And so for everybody else, Marco already mentioned it, but if you haven't checked out his website, please check it out at marcopasqua.com.
Mm-hmm.
And also you can check him on the documentary Back in Time.
That's right.
It's on streaming services.
Yeah, it was, I'll clarify, it was on Netflix for about 5 years, but I think Netflix Canada and US, the license expired, so you can get it on iTunes, you can get it, if you're in the States, which I do think we have one person from the United States here, you can watch it on Hulu as well, and that's just sort of my obsession with Back to the Future and controlling your destiny and all that stuff. It was a really big honor to be featured in this documentary. It talks a little bit more about my work and what I do as well. So thanks so much for your time and attention, everyone. It's a really big honor for me. Know that this is a passion for me, not only because of my lived experience, but because I think it's high time that all my friends and family with conditions who aren't able to land that position have the opportunity to have a great career at your business. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.